Hey everyone, Kelzum here. I'm hot off the heels of a Mystery Booster Sealed Deck Commander Challenge, wherein I, myself, Hobbes, and a few other Magic the Gathering community members on Twitter got together and built decks out of our sealed Mystery Booster boxes and played them on stream last night. I came off of that. I ended up winning that game in a very, very close, I think it was about 2.5 hour game, possibly 3 hours. And I didn't get to actually go through the deck building process that everyone else did. Everyone else opened their boxes on stream or recorded it. They recorded the deck building process, whereas I jumped in just a little bit later than them. So I decided that since we're going to be playing these decks again in the future and possibly even building brand new decks out, brand new Mystery Booster boxes once those are available again, I would go through a deck tech video and explain to everyone what all went into my deck, the deck building process, and what that looked like. So without further ado, here is Kruphix, God of Horizons. So something the Kruphix screams is big mana. Big mana decks usually revolve around, at least in Commander, spending a lot of mana for a really, really big creature, or spending a lot of mana on like a giant X spell that makes everyone draw X cards, does X damage to each creature. So in Simic colors, such as Kruphix is, my options were rather limited, especially in a limited deck. So that really informed my decision of what all I was aiming for when it came to this deck. So the first section we're going to go through is the card draw. I actually had a rather large selection of card draw available to me, and it was a really nice surprise. So one of the first cards I have in the deck is Merfolk Looter. Merfolk Looter is 1 in a blue for a 1/1 Merfolk Rogue that can tap and draw a card and discard a card. It's your basic looter that's been reprinted many, many times. One of my favorite spells, I show this with Wizards PR Blake Vermusen, is Mulldrifter. Mulldrifter is 4 in blue for a 2/2 of flying. When it enters the battlefield, you can draw 2 cards. But you can evoke it for 2 in the blue so that you can cast it for its evoke cost, and when you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. This was actually somewhat important inside one of the combos that won me the game last night, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. Another very great blue card draw effect was Ninja of the Deep Hours. Last night I had swung in with a mana dork that I have in the deck and flashed Ninja of the Deep Hours in, and then was able to get in a little bit of work on the card draw, but boards kind of got clogged up and I wasn't able to get in with it too much. But it was still very nice. It's effectively 2 mana to draw a card, which is not a bad rate. After that, I have Thieving Magpie, which is one of the old border cards, for 2 blue and 2 colorless. It's a 1/3 flying bird, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, I can draw a card. So it's another card draw effect from dealing damage. Also, importantly, it's a flying creature. Flying is always great in Limited, and in Commander, building a deck out of a sealed box, flying is still no less important than in a 40-card constructed Limited deck, I have come to find. After that, very basic Elfish Visionary, 1 in the green for 1/1 Elf Shaman. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Something that was a really great pull from my box was actually a Tireless Tracker, which is 2 in a green for a 3/2, and it's a human scout. And when a land enters the battlefield under your control, you investigate, where that means you put a clue token onto the battlefield. You can pay 2 and sacrifice that clue token to draw a card. He himself, when you sacrifice a clue, gets a +1/+1 encounter. And lastly, as far as creatures go with card draw attached to them, I have Sandstone Oracle, which is another flyer. It's a 7 mana 4/4 Sphinx artifact creature of flying. And when it enters the battlefield, I can choose an opponent, and if that player has more cards in hand than I do, I can draw cards equal to the difference. I never got to play that in the game, but that is definitely something I was really hoping to draw into. Now, as for a card draw that doesn't come with a body attached, I have Alhammer's Archive, which is 5 mana for a legendary artifact, and if you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. If you would draw a card except the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, you can draw 2 cards instead. Then we have Deep Analysis. 3 in the blue for a sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards with flashback for 1 in the blue. Pay 3 life. You can cast it from the graveyard and exile it for the same effects. Next, we have Dream Cache, which is 2 in the blue for a sorcery, where you draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand, both on top of your library or on the bottom of your library, or both. You can split it up whichever way. Mask of Memory is an equipment that costs 2 and equips for 1, and whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw 2 cards and then discard a card. Portent is blue for sorcery. You look at the top 3 cards of target player's library, then put them back in any order, and you may have that player shuffle their library and draw a card beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Preordain. Preordain is a blue and sorcery. Scry 2, then draw a card. Very basic spell. This, amazing. I got a Rhystic Study. I did not draw this until the late game in the stream last night when everyone had a butt ton of mana after attempt with Discovery, to where everyone is just going to pay the 1 for the card anyway, so I get to play it. I have Seek the Wilds, which is 1 in the green for a sorcery. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or a land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So this goes into finding creatures to get onto the battlefield, as well as finding land. So it's effectively a more or less draw effect. The next one is something I really want to play if Hammer's Archive out, and that is Teferi's Puzzle Box. And Teferi's Puzzle Box says that at the beginning of each player's upkeep, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library in any order, then draws that many cards for 4 mana. So with Alhammar's Archive, a lot of people don't realize that when you go to your draw step, the first thing you do before anything is draw your card for the turn. So when you use Teferi's Puzzle Box's trigger, and when it resolves, you're actually drawing double the amount that you put on the bottom of your library, and it's a replacement effect. So you're not getting 2 triggers, you're just drawing that many cards instead. So if I had 7 cards in my hand at the beginning of my draw step after I've drawn my card for the turn, or 8, as it may be, then with Alhammar's Archive on the battlefield, I would actually draw 16 cards, which is absurd. 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for sorcery, draw 3 cards of Concentrate. And lastly, I have Fascination. So this was one of my win conditions when it set me up to win last night when I played this on the stream. It is 2 blue and X. Sorcery, choose 1. Each player draws X cards, or each player puts the top X cards of their library into the graveyard. So, excellent card. I got 40 mana stored up on Kruphix last night when we streamed, and I couldn't quite get enough mana, even with the massive amount of lands that I had untapped on my turn, to mill everyone out or draw everyone out. So I ended up having everyone draw 40 cards, and although I had no maximum hand size from Kruphix being on the board and him giving me that ability of his, that static ability, everyone else still had to discard down to 7, and they were nowhere near as ahead on the ramp side was. So that was my blue draw, and as you can tell, I have a lot. That was a lot of card draw effects. That was a good portion of my deck. I would say, let me count here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I have 18 different card draw effects in this pile. So next we're going to look at my removal. My removal was a little bit on the lighter side, but with the ramp and the creatures I was able to get out, it wasn't as scary as I had anticipated it was going to be, not having that much removal. The first one is an Inox Survivalist, which is 1 in the green and a 2/1 to cast. However, it does have Morph, and its Morph cost, Megamorph, I should say, which is 1 in the green, and when it's turned face up, it destroys target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. It gets a +1/+1 counter. I was very much looking at artifact and enchantment removal because a lot of the more absurd effects in this format and the Mystery Booster sets is attached to artifacts like the Teferi's Puzzle Box and the Alhammar's Archive that I was just discussing. And there are actually more later on that are ridiculous I have in this deck that were in my card pool and my Mystery Booster sealed box that will make you understand exactly why I did include even a naturalize in here. But speaking of artifact enchantment removal, I have Destructor Dragon, which doubles as a 4/4 flyer for 4 and 2 green. And when it dies, you can destroy target non-creature permanent. So that can take out a land if it need to. There are a few lands in here. I don't think there's anything that's too absurd as far as the lands go that I would have to worry about. Mostly, again, for enchantments, artifacts, and that sort of absurdity. Next is Phyrexian Ingester, which is a 3/3 for 6 and a blue with imprint. When it enters the battlefield, I can exile target non-token creature, and it gets +X+Y, where X is the exiled creature's power, and Y is its toughness. So I end up using this on Mr. I'm blanking. But I used it on his Scourge of the Throne later in the game to stop that from getting out of hand, and that was a lifesaver. After that, I have more artifact and enchantment destruction in the form of Thrashing Brontodon, which is 2 green and 1 for a 3/4 dinosaur with 1, sacrifice it, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And one of my proudest moments was Boompile, which is a 4-mana artifact that says, tap this, flip a coin. If you win the flip, destroy all non-land permanents. I got this to actually blow up the very first time as soon as Hobbes swung at me with a large army of mini army of golems, and I think there's 1 or 2 other creatures he had swung at me, and I was just forced to activate it. I had it on the board. I didn't really want to lose my board at the time, but Kruphix being indestructible is just absolutely bonkers, so I wasn't too upset about it. And yeah, it's a pretty decent, unfortunately conditional board wipe in that you have to get lucky, and I did. The next is Memory Lapse. It is actually the only counter spell that I have in the deck, unfortunately. I did delay one of Hobbes' cards earlier on that was going to take out, I believe he was targeting my Dungrove Elder. I'd have to watch the VOD again, but I remember that he was very set on trying to remove a creature of mine, and I ended up using that on it in the early game. Next is the Naturalize I mentioned before. And finally, I have a removal spell / actually win condition, potentially, which is Temporal Fissure, being 4 and a blue, sorcery, return target permanent to its owner's hand, and it has Storm. So when I cast Temporal Fissure, I copy it for each spell cast before this turn, and I can choose new targets for those copies. So later in the game, I end up basically storming off with Intruder Alarm after drawing the 40 cards I mentioned earlier with Fascination. And had I not generated enough mana to win the game and mill Mr. Bevers out, I would have probably relied on Temporal Fissure just to bounce his board back to his hand. And then I have another potential win condition I could have had in here, which I'll get to in a moment. So that was my removal suite. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 removal effects, and 4 of them are attached to creatures, which is very nice. I love having removal attached to creatures, especially in a deck like this. Next, we'll look at my ramp, which I have also a lot of. Like, when I went big mana with Kruphix, it was absolutely no problem to make that strategy work. My box leaned totally towards it. My green just leaned me towards that. I have Alloy Mirror, which is 3 for a 2/2, and I can tap and add one of any color to my mana pool. Bloom Tender, which is absolutely amazing. In this deck, it's only 2 colors, so it's not as good as it could be, but it's still pretty great in that it's 1 and green for 1/1 that effectively taps for 2 mana if I have Kruphix on the battlefield. I also have Courser of Kruphix for a 2/4 for 1 and 2 green. It's an enchantment creature centaur that lets me play if the top card of my library revealed. I may play the top card of my library if it's a land card, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under my control, I gain 1 life. As you're going through this, you're going to realize how much land ramp I actually have in here. So I was easily negating the damage that was coming towards me throughout the game. Next is your basic Llanowar Elf. So 1/1 for 1 green elf druid that taps for a green mana. After that, We have Palladium Mirror, which is a 2/2 for 3 artifact creature mirror that taps to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Next, and this was an all-star, is Priest of Titania. 1/1 for 1 and a green. It's an elf druid that taps and adds a green to your mana pool for each elf on the battlefield. Important to note, and this helped me win the game after I was trying to storm off and we realized I had more mana coming in than I realized due to Mr. Bevers having an Boreal Druid on the battlefield at the time, is that, yeah, this taps for 1 for each elf, not just yours. Older cards. Evolving Wilds for mana fixing, nothing special. We have Cold Steel Heart, which is a 2 mana snow artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters, you can choose a color and it will tap to add 1 mana of the chosen color. Next, we have Cultivate for 2 and a green, which is a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, and put them onto the battlefield, tapped, and the other into your hand, then shuffle your library. We have Fertile Ground, which is 1 and a green for an aura that enchants a land, and whenever the land is tapped for mana, its controller adds a mana of any color. An additional mana, important to note. Lotus Petal, 0 mana artifact, tap and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. We have Magerite Stone. Magerite Stone is mostly in here just to work with the couple creatures I have, the 3 creatures I have that tap a mana, that being Bloom Tender, Priest of Titania, as well as a Longwar Elves. It's a 2 mana artifact for 1, and for 1 you can tap it. Untap target creature that has an activated ability with tapping and its cost. Search for Tomorrow. 2 and a green to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and still shuffle your library. It's a sorcery, but it also has to spend 2. You can pay a green, exile it with a suspend counter, 2 suspend counters on it, then remove that suspend counter during your upkeep, and when there's no suspend counters left on it, you may cast it for free. Sylvan Scrying, 1 and a green, sorcery. Search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Tempt with Discovery. I actually helped some people with mana fixing because Mr. Bevers and Jordan Devend was playing 3-color decks. Mr. Bevers was playing Wrath the Awakener, so he was playing a 3-color deck, and Jordan was playing a Mardu deck with Queen Marchesa, and they were both really hurting on their colors. So even though this helped me, everyone ended up doing it because everyone other than the big mana deck was feeling a little bit behind on mana by the time I got around to drawing and casting this. And the last ramp, what it does though is Tempting Offer. So search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Each opponent may search his or her library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. For each opponent who searches a library this way, search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Then each player who searched their library this way shuffles it. So in other words, in a 4-player pod, when you cast this, for each opponent that also chooses to search for a land and put it onto the battlefield, and it can be any land, and it comes onto the battlefield untapped, which is 2 very important factors on this card. Well, not as important and limited for the any land because there's not really that many non-basic lands, but you get to search for an additional card. So I ended up being able to get 4 lands for 4 mana off this in total, which was amazing. The last ramp spell I have is Urban Evolution, which for 3, a green and a blue, and for a sorcery, you draw 3 cards and you can play an additional land on the turn that you cast it. So as you can see, an ample amount of ramp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 ramp. 15 if you don't count Evolving Wilds because it's more fixing than anything else. And of course, with Kruphix is semi-ramp because it does let you extend your hand to the top card of your library effectively, to where if it's you're missing your land drop and it's on top of your library, you can just play it right there. Next, we're going to look at my beaters and more or less kind of a good portion of the win conditions for the deck. So the first one we're going to look at is Allosaurus Rider. For 5 and 2 green, it's an elf warrior with 1+ star, 1+ star. You may exile 2 green cards in your hand rather than paying Allosaurus Rider's mana cost. Allosaurus Rider's power and toughness are equal to 1 plus the number of lands you control. So late game in a big mana deck like this with all that ramp, that has the potential to be huge. Next we have Archetype of Imagination. For 4 and 2 blue, for an enchantment creature human wizard, creatures you control have flying. It's a 3/2, and creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. This was very relevant later in the game because Rith the Awakener was out. Mr. Bevers had Rith the Awakener, and Jordan had a Mob Fanatic that had an Angelic Blessing enchanted onto it, so this really saved me from being dead later on in the game once Perforos on Mr. Bevers' end did a massive amount of damage to the board. Dungrove Elder. It stood on the board for me for so long as a huge creature. It's a 2 and a green for a star. It's a tree folk, hexproof, and its power and toughness is equal to the number of forests you control. I pretty selectively went after mostly forests for most of the game. I wasn't really drawing into many of my draw spells, and that really hurt for quite a while until I hit that 40 mana and drew that Fascination later on in the game. But this guy was an all-star, especially with that hexproof, because it made it so hard for anyone to do anything about it. The next is Morrow. 2 and 2 green. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. So again, just this theme of gigantic creatures and being able to sculpt them into giant beaters. Palaka Worm. 4 and 3 green for 7/7 trample, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 7 life. And when it dies, you draw cards. So again, a trample 7/7 beater in a deck like this, it can easily ramp it out early on. Then there's Penumbra Spider. This one was more of a protect your net card because I had not many creatures with flying out on the board until I got the Archetype of Imagination out later on in the game. And it's 2 and 2 green for a 2/4 Spider with reach, and when it dies, you can create a 2/4 black Spider creature token with reach. So basically it makes like a shadow of itself when it dies. The next card is very important. It kind of tells you about one of the sub-themes in my deck, which is Thran Golem, a 3/3 for 5, an artifact creature golem, and it says as long as Thran Golem is enchanted, it gets +2/+2 and has flying, first strike, and trample. Very scary. The rest of the cards in this pile are cards that enable aggressive strategies and enable me to get into damage. And hand in hand with Thran Golem is Ancestral Mask, which is a enchantment aura for 2 and a green, enchant creature. The enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each other enchantment on the battlefield, including your opponents. Absolutely brutal with Thran Golem or any of the other number of creatures I have that have either flying or trample or any of the other effects. Also enhancing my creatures was a Basilisk Caller, 1 mana for an artifact equipment with an equip cost of 2, and it gives the equipped creature Death Touch and Lifelink. Then I have Il Umbra, which is 1 in the green for an aura enchantment. It has flash and it enchants a creature. The enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has totem armor, so if the enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead you remove all damage from it and destroy this aura, which in that case refers to the Il Umbra. Rancor, another evasion enabler, giving the creature trample. It's 1 green for an enchantment aura that enchants a creature, and enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and has trample, as well as when Rancor is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can return it to its owner's hand. After that, we have Ronus' Monument for 3. It's a legendary artifact, and green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast a creature spell, period, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Absolutely brutal. Lastly, in this pile, we have Talons of Wildwood, which is a 1 and a green for an enchantment aura that enchants a creature, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has trample, but you can also pay 2 and green and return Talons of Wildwood from your graveyard to your hand. So again, a lot of trample enablers here. We have Talons of Wildwood, we have Ronus' Monument, we have Rancor, we have Thran Golem, which gets trample if it's enchanted. We have Palaka Worm, which also natively has trample, naturally has trample by itself. And this Archetype of Imagination, which can get you just your creatures to fly over them. Then you have all these big beaters like Allosaurus Rider, Dungrove Elder, Morrow, the worm that can just go in and get in there, and with these enhancements, just go for the throat and actually get brutal combat damage and if I'm not attaching them to Kruphix himself for commander damage. So yeah, that was kind of the cards that lended towards the aggressive side of the deck and getting in there into the combat zone. The last pile that I have here is kind of a utility pile. These are effects that effectively just kind of help me get there in the game and kind of help me get towards winning. It's going to start with propaganda. But, the longer you stay alive, the higher your health is, the higher chance you have of winning. So for 2 in the blue, enchantment, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 mana for each creature he or she controls that's attacking you. I also have Archaeomancer, which is 2 in the blue. It's a 1/2 human wizard that when it enters the battlefield, you can return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, as well as Eternal Witness, which is 1 and 2 green for a 2/1 human shaman that says when it enters the battlefield, you can return target card period from your graveyard to your hand. This was absolutely necessary for me to win the game that I won last night because I used these after getting enough mana up to get the Fascination back from my graveyard to my hand to where I could mill Mr. Bevers out. Mr. Bevers was the last one standing after his Perforos dealt 22 damage to the table, and me and him were the last 2 standing. But absolutely spot on helped me win that game. Sakashima the Imposter is also amazing. He can come in here as a copy of any of these creatures in my decks, so heck yes. He also works very well with mana dorks that can produce at least 4 mana and Intruder Alarm. So, Intruder Alarm says that creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps. It's a 2 in blue enchantment, and whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. This was very key in me actually winning the game and practically storming off, because a turn after I made each player draw 40 cards with Fascinate, I drew into Intruder Alarm. I had a lot of creatures in my hand. So on my next turn, I had Priest of Titania out, I had Elvish Visionary, eventually I had Lawnmower Elves, I eventually drew into the Bloom Tender through recurring Mulldrifter a couple times, and then I just kept tapping for 4 to 5 mana, then playing a creature that cost less, so I was only up mana, I only had a net gain in my mana. I eventually got there to where I could finally deck Mr. Bevers and win that game. Another win condition I had, which probably could have been in my enhancements pile with my beaters, was Corrupted Conscience, which is 3 and 2 blue for an enchantment aura that enchants a creature, and you control the enchanted creature, so I can actually take control of a creature from someone. And then it also gives the enchanted creature Infect. And as you probably know, creatures with Infect deal combat damage, damage period, to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, but also damage to players in the form of poison counters, and if any player has 10 poison counters at any given time, they automatically lose the game. So if the big flyers, the enhancements, the tramplers, being able to take someone else's big creature, I could have taken Mr. Bevers' Wraith with this, and then attacked him with it, and some sick sense of irony. But yeah. So after that, I also had Temporal Mastery, which just let me take an extra turn, build up a little bit more. And then it's 5 and 2 blue. As a sorcery, you take an extra turn after this one, and then you exile it. But it also has a miracle cost of 1 in the blue, so that you can cast the card for its miracle cost when you draw it, if it's the first card you drew this turn. Next we have Lich's Mirror, which is 5 mana for an artifact. And it says, if you would lose the game, instead shuffle your hand, your graveyard, and all permanents you own into your library, then draw 7 cards, and your life total becomes 20. Now, at the time that I had this out, it's actually funny, because I was so far ahead of everyone else, but there was a lot of really dangerous board states being built up. Again, towards the end of the game, Mr. Bevers, particularly, he had the Rith the Awakener, who was his commander. He had Perforos, Goblin Bombardment, a lot of stuff. Hobbes had the Golems from Precursor Golem, which is a 3/3 golem for 5 mana that creates 2 other 3/3s when it enters the battlefield, and he kept recurring that. And Jordan had his Flying Mog Fanatic that was going to start threatening to start coming in as well. And the funny thing is, though, is that had I lost the game and taken lethal damage, or lost the game in any way, and sacrifices, I would have been so far behind that there would have been no coming back from 20 life and having no lands, because it shuffles all of your permanents in and you draw 7 cards. So you have to pray, you draw lands, but then you have to rebuild your entire land base back up again. So this was a cute inclusion, but I think I'm going to actually replace it moving forward for the next game, because ultimately it seemed like it was really neat and it's going to be really fun. It'd be really funny to have it go off, but it's actually going to be a very miserable experience because you're starting the game over again while everyone else is still sitting there on turn 15 or 16 or whatever turn it is. So not as good of an idea as I had initially thought. Lastly, I have Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. It's a 1 and 2 green for a Planeswalker. Starts with 3 loyalty. You can +1 her to put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield. That was relevant with Intruder Alarm on the battlefield. I did use that to untap my Mana Dorks again once. You can use -2 to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, which is the more relevant ability that I was using to try and buff up my board and try and get to a point where I could actually start swinging in for damage rather than just spinning my wheels, so to speak. And then its ultimate is -7. You gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. If I had gotten that ultimate up and I had the proliferate capabilities, that would have been absolutely absurd by the time I got this out on, I think it was my 2 or 3 turns before the last turn of the game. So yeah, that is my Kruphix Sky of Horizons deck. I think the VOD, over the course of the VOD, you can watch on Mr. Hobbes' channel. I will put a link to that VOD in the video here or somewhere in the description. I think the highest amount of mana I had stored on Kruphix at once was the 50 mana that I had stored on him. The turn that I cast a Fascination, which I think I actually forgot to say what it does because I was so involved in saying it was one of my win conditions. But it's X and 2 blue, and it's a sorcery, and you can choose one. Each player draws X cards, or each player puts X cards from the top of their library into the graveyard. So you can either draw X card, multicolor, the art pack, everything was so crazy in this deck. The synergy was unreal. It's hard to believe that I actually thought about going with Marin or Black or Golgari just because I had Living Death and I had that Revel and Riches and some slightly playable black cards. I'm really looking forward to doing another mystery box booster draft for a commander deck, and I really hope we can get one here soon. If not, I might shake it up a little bit. I might try and build Aetherios or something else and see if I can make something work. That Perforos and Norm the Wary are very tempting. But until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the stream.